This is a response to PPSimmons' video, Apparently Evolution is Still, Well, Evolving. Well, Carl, I have to say that your latest videographic floater surfaced from the depths of the septic tank called the PPSimmons channel much more quickly than I'd anticipated. As a result, you caught me working on the script for Holy Hallucinations 29, but I dropped everything just for you and instead dedicated myself to eradicating the lingering stench from your newest noxious arse rumble. In this particular offering, it seems you've taken it upon yourself to regurgitate the rancid sputum of a certain Robert Roselli of theoryoflivevolution.com. Now, I must confess that I'd never heard of this particular individual or his rather eccentrically named website, and so I popped over there and did something that you're apparently congenitally incapable of, i.e. some research. Once there, it rapidly became evident that you've somehow managed to hit an all-time low, and seeing that I'm dealing with you, Carl, that's quite an achievement. You see, it appears that Mr. Tosselli is a conspiracy theorist of quite extraordinary proportions, even by your standards, who subscribes to pretty much every crackpot idea imaginable which he's blended into his own quite unique hallucinatory cocktail. Additionally, it was difficult to determine what exactly qualifies Tosselli as the authority on biological evolution that you apparently take him for, Carl. From what I could find, it seems that he has a master's in civil engineering which he claims demonstrates that he's a scientifically grounded thinker, whereas everything on his website only seems to demonstrate that he's nothing but a certifiable loon. So it's a mystery to me that you felt that anyone should value the opinion of someone who's clearly nuttier than a squirrel turd and whose only qualification to opine on evolution is the same as yours, that is, that he has an anus where his mouth should be. I can therefore only say that you've done yourself a disservice here, because not only does Tosselli make your usual sources look like scientific leviathans, but also because your choice essentially sets the seal on my suspicions that you've finally relinquished your tentative grasp on sanity and plunged headfirst into the realms of the complete batshit crazy. With that said, I'm not going to comment any further on Mr. Tosselli's unfortunate mental dysfunction, but urge anyone who doubts me to gird their loins and wade onto his website to check for themselves. Meanwhile, to preempt any accusations that I'm engaging in ad hominem argumentation by discrediting your stooge instead of his so-called arguments, I'm now going to address his main points while simultaneously stuffing them up your arse one by one.
Fact number 1. There is no physical fossil record of even one single mutant involving species anywhere. There are a lot of artist renditions, anecdotal evidence, and claims of such things, but that's it.
This is just the preamble, and I already had to stop here to ask, what the fuck is a fossil of a mutant involving species exactly? If you want people to understand you, Carl, you'd be well advised to use the English language rather than the incomprehensible mumbo-jumbo you just excreted. You see, it takes more than spouting random words to be convincing, and you really should take a little time to consider the order in which you squeeze them through your sphincter if you want people to understand you. If you were quoting Tosselli verbatim, then it speaks volumes as to the quality of your news source, but in any case, while this preposterously amateurish language might work with your lobotomized simpleton cheerleaders, all it does for those with more than a handful of functional neurons is to make us laugh at you even harder. Anyway, let's get on and look at the rest of this fact and see if we can decipher what you're trying to get at.
One cannot walk into a college laboratory and find the fossil evidence. One cannot walk into the Museum of Natural History and find the evidence. A verifiable and actual fossil record of evolution simply does not exist. So if there truly were millions of mutant morphing stages between animals and man, as the mad scientists claim, then don't you think a single one of these millions of life forms might show up in the fossil record? Rob asks.
Sorry, still sounds like meaningless bullshit to me. I can only guess that you two fucktards are vaguely referring to transitional forms. If that's the case, then you really should know better, because paleontologists have described thousands of such forms in great detail despite your unwarranted assertion to the contrary. You see, Carl, if you stubbornly refuse to acknowledge what's been described and are willing to look like an ignorant dolt in public, then it's easy to smugly declare that no such evidence exists. But if you want to convince anyone other than a microcephalic imbecile, you need to do a little better and explain why said evidence is inadequate. Of course, in reality, you don't have any such credible explanations and so settle for outright denial. In response, I can say that firstly, back in Holy Hallucinations 24, I already explained to your partners in slime, William Liar Craig and his personal arse-licking toady Cockshite, why the uneducated creationist's ignorance of comparative zoology and the rarity of the fossilization process puts pay to these claims of missing millions. Secondly, it also occurred to me that what you and Toselli might have been trying to do here in your appallingly puerile vernacular was to obliquely quote mine a Stephen Jay Gould line from his 1977 article in Natural History that creationists have been crapping on for over 30 years, that is, the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. If that's the case, Carl, then I'll remind you and the monkey you're quoting that this particular lie has been rammed back up creationist arseholes as many times as it's been shat out by them. Gould himself made it abundantly clear both in the article and subsequently that he was referring to the relative paucity of fine transitions between pairs of species, a paucity that he and Niles Eldredge explained with their proposal of punctuated equilibrium, which itself arose from the elucidation of the mechanics of speciation 3 decades before by, amongst others, Ernst Mayr, one of the founders of the modern synthesis. In short, Carl, these fossils are only missing in your and your delusional friends' fevered imaginations, something you and Mr. Toselli would realize if you stopped for a moment to pull your heads out of each other's asses and actually visited some of those laboratories and museums you mentioned.
Number 2. Rob says Charles Darwin himself admits that his theory can't explain our human instinct or origins. Check it out for yourself, he says, in Chapter 7 on the topic of instinct in the origin of species or the preservation of the favored races in the struggle for life.
Oh, for fuck's sake, Carl, are you serious? I know you're working hard to urinate all over the achievements of people whose asses you're unfit to wipe with your tongue, and on the very science that makes your miserable life and your inept video productions possible, but with arguments of this quality all you're doing is getting your shoes wet. Firstly, I'll point out your blatant use of a genetic logical fallacy. Darwin's views on the evolution of instinct have as much effect on the evidence for and current status of evolutionary theory as his views on the colour of Queen Victoria's crotchless panties would have on the demonstrable fact that you're a colossal douchebag. Secondly, while Darwin did consider the evolution of instinct a challenge to explain when Origins was first published, it's somewhat telling that you and Mr. Toselli neglected to mention that he later solved this dilemma with his formulation of group selection in The Descent of Man, coincidentally the same book in which he also explained, at least according to you, our inexplicable human origins. I wonder why it is that you missed that, Carl. Could it be because you know little and care even less about the subject on which you deem yourself fit to preach? Or because you don't give a second thought about lying your filthy little fundy face off in any way you choose as long as it suits your despicably vile agenda? Either way, if the best you can do to attack modern evolutionary theory is by resorting to criticizing the state of the science 150 years ago, you must be getting really desperate. That desperation came through loud and clear when you followed up by first trying to link evolution to abortion, racism and eugenics, and then topped it off with this noxiously repulsive brain fart.
And does another infamous person come to mind when you hear the last half of the title of Darwin's book, The Preservation of the Favored Races? Can we find Adolf Hitler in this fossil record, do you suppose?
A guilt by association fallacy now, is it, Carl? And not a particularly new one at that. But then you creationists are nothing if not predictable, which I suppose comes with the territory when all your assertions have seen the inside of your collected rectums countless times and you have no credible or cogent arguments to make. Obviously, only a lame brain of truly nephilistic proportions would be unable to grasp that even if this particular skid mark of a claim were true, Hitler using evolution as a pretext to commit genocide would have no effect on the veracity and accuracy of evolutionary theory. In reality, there's no historical evidence whatsoever that Hitler's policies were informed by biological evolution, but rather by the bigoted philosophical school of thought inappropriately named social Darwinism, which had as much to do with Darwin as Pamela Anderson's tits have to do with Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron's sex life. This is the point where an atheist might respond by turning the tables and pointing out that Hitler, if anything, leaned in a distinctly Christian direction and insinuate that this might have influenced his homicidal proclivities. I'm not going to do that though, Carl, because it would be grossly unfair and inaccurate, and unlike you, I have a conception of the meaning of the word decency. In reality, of course, Hitler was just a sick and twisted bastard, and only another similarly obnoxious bastard would use him to further his limp and fallacious argument.
Fact number 3. Evolutionary scientists are all over the map, Rob says, on what evolution actually is. Multiple accounts of evolution by evolutionists themselves tell very different stories, as their own theories keep evolving.
You and the fuckwit whose astonishingly banal shite you're proudly smearing over your video evidently don't realize that if evolutionary theory wasn't changing, then it wouldn't be science. The strength of science lies in its obligation to continually question its conclusions and thereby improve and refine its explanations of nature, and the results of this continual improvement should be evident to even delusional dick splashes like you. I suppose that I shouldn't be surprised though, because it seems that childish simplistic minds like yours seem to view uncertainty as a weakness rather than a sign of intellectual honesty. Instead, you prefer to stamp the indelible label of truth on whatever concept makes you feel better and then stick to it like a pair of pubic lice to a hairy testicle, regardless of how ludicrous it is. Isn't it interesting, though, that you choose to draw the line at maintaining other previously supposed absolute truths in your holy book, such as the curing of diseases by animal sacrifice, the treatment of women during menstruation, and the eating of shellfish? Could it be that you're a little more flexible about what your scriptures say when it might actually inconvenience you, Carl, but not when it comes to subjects that you're too stupid to understand and whose wholesale rejection you're too ignorant to realize would be devastating to us all? I'm also going to ignore the pathetic examples from populist non-technical sources that you gave to attempt to back up your piss-poor assertion, but suffice it to say that to anyone who knows anything about science, the disagreements that you allude to are a sign of a vibrant and healthy field of study that's roaring smoothly along the superhighway of progress, while your clapped-out, steaming creationist jalopy is spluttering to a standstill down the rutted dead end of your primitive and crippled belief system.
And finally, Rob says, number 4, in order for the theory of evolution and the Big Bang to be true, 4 of the most well-established laws of science must be compromised in one way or another. Newton's laws of motion, the laws of thermodynamics, the law of biogenesis, and Kepler's law of planetary motion.
This is where I lost my shit, Carl, and almost pissed my pants with laughter. You really have no idea how stupid you're making yourself look, do you? This is the kind of stuff that could be debunked by a 5th grader, and the only reason I'm bothering to spend any time on it is because I refuse to let you get away with ejaculating your syphilitic mental emissions over science without pointing out your non-existent sperm count. Firstly, in real science, the Big Bang has nothing to do with evolutionary theory apart from inside the psychedelic hallucinations that for creationists pass as reality. Secondly, I have no idea what Newton's and Kepler's laws have to do with any of this, and since you didn't see fit to regale us with what I'm sure would have been a most amusing exposition, there's not much I can do to address them. I can, however, point out that Kepler's laws are a special case of Newton's, and that your redundant repetition only serves to highlight your and Mr. Tosselli's ignorance of the basic science that you mental midgets nevertheless conceitedly think you're capable of attacking. Thirdly, the claim that evolution is impossible because of an imaginary thermodynamic barrier barely needs addressing because it's been refuted more times than Nephilim-freeze modems overheated from terabit porn downloads. The only thing this claim does is further demonstrate your mate's complete ineptitude when it comes to the science he's ineffectually trying to wipe his arse with, and his inability to understand the difference between an open and closed system. That inability doesn't render the argument valid, Carl, just stupid. To show exactly how ludicrous this claim is, I should point out that if the generation of order over time is impossible, then how have we in the past few thousand years come from sitting around campfires eating toasted goat shit and getting around on camels like the authors of your fables, to living in towers of glass and steel and exploring the outer reaches of our solar system? Once you can answer that, Carl, you'll know why this claim is as pathetic as you are. And finally, aside from your attempt to link evolution to the origin of life again despite being told why it's dishonest multiple times by myself and others, I already explained to you back in Holy Hallucinations 26 why the overturn of the concept of spontaneous generation has nothing to do with modern hypotheses of abiogenesis. Ignoring such corrections and simply repeating your assertions doesn't magically make them right, Carl. It just demonstrates how effective your flavour of religion is at making you a lying, dishonest pissmark, and how worthless your flavour of religion is at making you a decent human being.
Rob Russelli says that evolutionists may see this particular video and hem and haw and hold in derision the points that are made, but realize this: their so-called scientific theory can never be proven or tested empirically, as scientific hypotheses are supposed to be tested, and at its core, evolution grants infinite latitude to those who support its claims.
While I do confess to resorting to a modicum of derision in addressing this veritable bullshit tsunami, Carl, I think that the record will show that there was no hemming and hawing involved. In addition, my derision was not only sorely deserved, but also in direct proportion to the unwarranted buggery you subjected science and reason to during the course of your video. One problem with this complete cowpat of an argument is that evolutionary theory is tested hundreds if not thousands of times daily by scientists in numerous disparate fields of study, and this has been going on relentlessly since Darwin first published his ideas. To date, it's withstood a century and a half of intense scrutiny, and while it's still possible that it might one day fail, I for one am not holding my breath. As in all fields of science, the results of these tests are interpreted in the light of and incorporated into the current conceptual framework, which in the case of biology is evolutionary theory. In cases where a theory is fundamentally flawed, it becomes increasingly difficult to fit more and more new data into the model over time. The conceptual cracks eventually become obvious and the theory fails and is replaced in a paradigm shift with one that has better explanatory power. This happened numerous times in the past, as for example geocentrism gave way to heliocentrism, classical mechanics gave way to quantum theory and relativity, and a static crust gave way to continental drift and plate tectonics. At present, no such shift has occurred in biology because evolution has withstood everything thrown at it. As for the infinite latitude comment, I think I can best explain this inanity with an analogy that even a simpleton like you might be able to follow, Carl. Let's consider a hypothetical murder case where the police and district attorney are working on the theory that you're the culprit. This theory is based on the fact that you were found within a block of the crime scene, you were carrying a gun that matched the bullet in the victim and had fresh powder residue on your hands. Your fingerprints and DNA were on the victim's body and you were spattered with his blood. Two people heard you scream, "Die in the name of Jesus, atheist scum," just before the gunshot, and a third saw you running from the scene just afterwards. And on top of that, you had the victim's wallet in your pocket and a photograph of the body on your cell phone. After all this is presented at trial, however, the defense stands up with a witness who claims that at the time of the murder you were on the job in his whorehouse in Istanbul. His testimony, though, is contradicted by the facts that you're probably biologically incapable of, shall we say, rising to the occasion, that your passport has no Turkish stamps in it, that the witness recently deposited a check for $1 million made out by your ministry, and that your shriveled genitals appear to be unaffected by the unfortunate malady from which the lady in question was suffering. It shouldn't take a PhD to work out where I'm going with this, so I won't spell it out for you, Carl, but I will ask you this. Is it really likely that this new evidence invalidates the prosecution's theory, or can you think of any more plausible explanations that elegantly explain it within the current theoretical framework? Of course, by the reasoning you present in your video, Mr. Torselli would be the one dumb fuck in the jury voting not guilty.
Rob urges, demand this of those prodigious pseudoscience prognosticators. Mr. Evolutionist, prove your own theory. You come up with the scientific experiment to prove your suppositions. You prove that a pile of carbon can turn into a human brain.
Firstly, let's make it clear that no evolutionary biologist that's not suffering from a cerebral malignancy would claim that a pile of carbon has ever or could ever turn into a human brain. Though having watched your video, Carl, I'm not sure I can be certain of the opposite. But breathtakingly outrageous straw men aside, presumably what you and Torselli are expecting us to produce is something like a crocodile in a test tube, or to document a pregnant tiger shitting out a baby baboon. If that's the case, of course, then the evidence will never be forthcoming because you're not asking for evidence of evolution, but rather for the sick parody of it that you've constructed either out of sheer ineptitude or deliberate misrepresentation. If instead, by some miracle, you're asking for real evidence of the real theory being expanded by real science, then I'd like to point you in the direction of the mountain that's already been and continues to be generated in its support. All you need to do is go to PubMed and type in evolution, Carl, and you'll find over 300,000 peer-reviewed papers in research areas such as systematics, paleontology, geochemistry, molecular biology, biochemistry, geology, embryology, biogeography, biostratigraphy, plate tectonics, and nuclear physics, to name a few. I can only assume that to date you and Mr. Torselli have been unaware of this evidence because the walls of your colons are pressed too tightly against your ears to hear of it. But now that I've set you straight, Carl, I'd be delighted to see you read a few of these reports and produce a critique of them with a detailed and specific explanation of how your creation model better explains their data, and without resorting to your miraculous, all-encompassing and entirely useless panacea. It would certainly make a change from hearing you parroting the inane ramblings of one clinically delusional fucktard after another. Of course, my hopes aren't high by any means, partly because you're too stupid to understand the subject matter, and partly because over the years creationists have demonstrated that they have no honest and valid arguments to make for their position. As a result, I suspect I'll have to settle for just watching more of your smug and sickening dishonesty in the future and using my boot to shove it roughly back up your arse where it belongs.